Bullying. A short story. One of the first memories I have is sitting on a step outside the door of my new school, crying. I was 4 years old, and this was my first big adventure in life. Now, you might not think it's such an adventure, but for 4-year-old me, it was huge. I'm not sure if traumas such as these were to affect my future life, but I'd like to think so. Or perhaps I'd like to make that my excuse. You'll understand why I said that later. My story starts in those formative years in primary school, when, like all the other children, I was trying to make my way in life, sorting out where I stood in the realm of things, making friends and enemies, learning all the new wonders that only school could offer, and trying desperately to impress Miss Carrie, whom I worshipped from the day I moved into her class. And all this was being done all at the same time. And so it was that I soon figured out that school was a much more complicated place than home. At home, there was only me and Mummy. Oh, and Daddy, but I didn't see much of him as he was always working away. Until the day I went to school, my Mummy was my life. She doted on me, and without my knowing it then, she spoiled me rotten. I was just given about anything I asked for, and Mummy would spend long hours looking after me and playing with me and giving me her time and her undivided attention. School was not like home. There were lots of other children in my class, and the only adult was Miss Carrie. She was adorable, but was not like a Mummy. She was very strict and used to shout a lot, and she could not understand that when I wanted to play with something, it meant that it was playtime, no matter what she was doing at the time. I didn't understand, therefore, when she said that I could not play with this or do that, or that I would have to wait until playtime to do what I liked. Well, this would not do. The other children seemed to understand her and what she said, but I was having none of it. How dare she tell me off for doing something wrong? I never did anything wrong. Mummy always told me what a good boy I was, and would cuddle me and reward me for playing beautifully. Time passed on. There was one boy in my class who proved to be most difficult and would not listen to one word I said. In fact, he even argued with me about what games to play and who we ought to let play with us. He was a most disagreeable boy. Things came to a head one day when we were arguing about one of the most important things in life. Who was going to play the lorry driver and who was going to be the postman? Well, of course, I was the only truly qualified one to drive the play lorry which sat in the corner of our classroom. But he didn't see it that way. As our discussion got louder and louder, he pushed me. I couldn't believe it. So I pushed him back twice as hard, and to my surprise, he ended up on his bottom and began to cry. Well, this was quite a revelation to me. I realised then that I was stronger than him and that I was bigger than him, and this meant that I could easily get my own way. It was going to be just like being at home again. No more arguing about what we play and who became what. This was smashing. Or so I thought. As these delightful thoughts were buzzing around my head, Miss Corrie laid into me with what can only be described as verbal abuse. She accused me of being a bully. I was not sure what one of those was, but I did not like the sound of it. It didn't sound overly nice. She said I ought to know better than to be pushing children round, which was such a silly thing of her to say, as he had been the one to start the pushing. It all seemed perfectly straightforward to me. And then she said I was a bad boy. This was more than I was prepared to stand for. So I put my best cry face on and opened my lungs as far as they would go and started to bellow like an Olympic crier. And this was going to be a gold medal performance, I knew. After quite some time of being completely ignored, I ran out of steam and wondered why no one was coming to my aid. This had never happened before, and I thought I knew all the tricks to get people's attention. When I had settled down, Miss Corrie took me speak with the head teacher, which at last I thought was the most sensible thing she'd done all morning. At last I would be able to have it out with someone who would listen to me, and she would listen to me with fair play. When we reached the head's office, something a bit strange happened. I was quite prepared to knock on the door and wait to be invited in, but this did not happen. Miss Corrie told me to stand outside the head's office while she went in to speak with her privately. This I thought to be most peculiar. When the door opened next, I was ushered in, and before I could even say my first important opening statement, the head raised her voice ever so slightly, like she was annoyed at me. How odd. I began to speak, but she told me to be quiet. She then proceeded to tell me that bullying was not acceptable and that it was a horrid thing. As I did not know what bullying was, I had to agree with her. She was the teacher and knew better than I did. But when I told her how much I agreed with her, it only seemed to make her more angry. This was indeed odd behaviour. She continued to explain that the role of the bully was a horrid thing, a thing that would not be tolerated in her school. I agreed with her even more earnestly, and she got redder in the face. What was going on? "You see what I have to put up with," said wonderful Miss Corrie, who all of a sudden didn't seem too wonderful at all. She was insinuating that I was a problem in her class. How dare she? She was the one who never listened to me. She was the one who never played with me like Mummy did. And she was the one who always thought she was right when I knew she was actually more often than not wrong. I decided to lodge my complaint in the strongest fashion, but I was told quite rudely by the head not to open my mouth again. This, again, did not easily compute. God had given me a mouth for that very reason, and to be told not to use one of God's gifts seemed more ridiculous to me than ever. And why were they still talking about bullying? Then it slowly began to dawn on me that this bully, this nasty thing they had described and said was not acceptable, this thing which I had agreed with most helpfully, was actually describing me. They were calling me a bully. How could this be? I didn't even know what a bully was. There was nothing else for it. I told these two teachers in no uncertain terms that I wanted my mummy. They told me again to be quiet. How rude. The next thing to happen was utterly unbelievable. My mummy was truly magic, for the very next person I saw coming round the corner was her, my mummy. Wow! How did she know that I needed her help? I think my mummy is the greatest of the entire superheroes. I was so relieved when I saw her, and I thought to myself, Miss Corrie and Miss Head Teacher were in for it now. Super Mummy had arrived. There was a problem. I knew it from the second I saw Mummy's face. She looked flustered and slightly red, and was a bit out of breath. I thought she'd been running. She gave me a look I had never seen before. She looked really mad at me. I still could not quite grasp what this bullying business was about, but it seemed to me that all the adults were in on it, as though they had been brainwashed or something. Miss Head Teacher took my mummy into her office, and I was made to wait outside. I didn't like this, and began to feel that cryy feeling deep inside me beginning to stir. I was then ushered into the head's office, and was confronted by the head teacher once again, and my mummy. Not Super Mummy, who was going to stand up for me, the mummy I knew and loved, but a mummy I had never seen before, upset and red in the face. It was true then. This bullying thing was something that all adults were drawn into. They all seemed to be afraid of it, and they were talking to me like I was a bully. How could Mummy be afraid of me? She knew me better than anyone in the world. I thought my head was going to explode, so I did the only thing I could. I sat down right there on the floor in Miss Head Teacher's office. Mummy picked me up and took me home. The rest of that day was terrible. Mummy tried to explain to me what bullying was all about, and that I could not push other children over. I can, I thought to myself. You should have seen me do it this morning. She made me promise that I would never do it again. Now, I am not a child who likes to make promises too easily. I have found out to my cost that promises can have dire consequences. So I had to mull this promise over before I succumbed to Mummy's pleadings. What a very strange day it was turning out to be. So, there begins my story. 4 years old, in my first class of school, and branded a bully. Little did I know what effect this branding would have on me in the years to come. Time passed on.